Human life is full of invisible patterns. Every decision we make, every reaction we show, every relationship we build is influenced by psychological mechanisms that often operate beneath our awareness. When people hear the phrase psychological tricks, they sometimes imagine manipulation or secret tactics. But in reality, psychological tricks are simply small insights into how the human mind works. They are shortcuts based on behavioral science, cognitive psychology, and philosophy that help us understand why people act the way they do. When we understand these patterns, we gain a kind of mental clarity. We begin to see that many of our struggles are not random. They are the result of predictable psychological processes that have developed in the human brain over thousands of years. The human brain evolved to survive, not necessarily to be happy. Our ancestors lived in environments filled with danger and uncertainty. Because of this, the brain developed systems that constantly scan for threats, evaluate social status, and protect emotional safety. These systems helped early humans survive in groups. But in modern society, they often create confusion, anxiety, and misunderstanding. What we call psychological tricks are essentially ways to work with the brain instead of against it. They reveal how subtle shifts in thinking, behavior, and perception can dramatically change the way we experience life. One of the most powerful psychological insights is that perception shapes reality. Two people can experience the same event and interpret it completely differently. The event itself may be neutral, but the meaning attached to it determines the emotional outcome. For example, if someone does not reply to a message, one person may think they must be busy, while another might think they are ignoring me. The emotional reaction depends entirely on the interpretation. This simple mechanism explains why some people remain calm under pressure, while others feel overwhelmed by small inconveniences. The brain constantly creates narratives to explain what is happening around us, and these narratives guide our behavior. When someone frequently assumes negative intentions from others, psychologists often interpret this as a reflection of internal insecurity or past emotional experiences. The brain tries to protect itself from rejection by predicting it before it happens. On the other hand, people who naturally assume neutral or positive intentions often possess a stronger sense of internal security. This does not mean they are naive. Rather, their brain has learned that not every uncertainty is a threat. Someone does not immediately jump to negative conclusions. It often indicates emotional stability and a balanced cognitive style. Human behavior also reveals a great deal about internal confidence. Consider how people respond to criticism. Some individuals react defensively, raising their voice or immediately arguing. Others pause, listen, and respond calmly. The reaction itself is a psychological signal. When someone becomes highly defensive, it often means the criticism has touched an internal vulnerability. The brain interprets it as a threat to identity. In contrast, when someone can examine criticism without becoming emotionally overwhelmed, it often indicates a stronger internal sense of self. Their identity does not feel fragile, so feedback becomes information rather than an attack. Body language also communicates deep psychological signals. Eye contact, posture, facial expressions, and even the speed of movement can reveal underlying mental states. People who maintain relaxed but consistent eye contact usually display confidence and engagement. However, if someone avoids eye contact completely, it might suggest anxiety, discomfort, or fear of judgment. Yet context matters. In some situations, reduced eye contact simply indicates deep thinking or cultural differences in communication styles. Psychologists do not rely on a single behavior to draw conclusions. They observe patterns across time. The same principle applies to silence. Silence in conversation can mean many different things depending on the emotional context. Sometimes, silence indicates thoughtful reflection. Other times, it reveals emotional withdrawal or internal conflict. When someone consistently withdraws during emotionally intense discussions, psychologists may interpret it as a coping strategy. The brain temporarily shuts down verbal expression to avoid emotional overload. But when silence occurs in calm environments, it may represent self-awareness and a reflective personality. Another fascinating psychological pattern involves decision-making. Human beings like to believe they are rational thinkers, but research consistently shows that emotions heavily influence choices. Even decisions that appear logical often begin with an emotional preference. The mind then constructs rational explanations afterward. This process is known as post hoc rationalization. For example, someone might feel an immediate emotional attraction toward a particular job opportunity. Later, they justify the decision with practical reasons such as salary or career growth. The emotional preference came first, but the mind prefers to present decisions as logical. Understanding this pattern reveals one of the most life-changing psychological tricks. When you want to influence decisions, emotional framing often matters. More than pure logic, this is why storytelling is so powerful. A well-told story engages emotions, imagination, and empathy, allowing ideas to enter the mind more easily. Facts inform the brain, but stories move the human spirit. Social interactions also reveal deep psychological patterns. Humans are fundamentally social creatures, and much of our behavior revolves around belonging and acceptance. One subtle psychological phenomenon is the mirror effect. People naturally mirror the behaviors, tone, and posture of individuals they feel comfortable with. If someone leans forward, the other person may unconsciously lean forward as well. If someone speaks slowly and calmly, the listener may gradually match that pace. This mirroring process builds rapport and emotional synchronization between people. When mirroring does not occur, it may signal emotional distance. If one person consistently speaks energetically while the other remains withdrawn, the psychological connection may be weak. This does not necessarily indicate dislike, but it often suggests a lack of shared emotional rhythm. Skilled communicators intuitively adjust their behavior to match the emotional state of others, creating a sense of psychological harmony. Another powerful psychological principle involves attention. The brain tends to focus on what it repeatedly encounters. Someone constantly consumes negative news, pessimistic conversations, or self-critical thoughts. The brain gradually begins to interpret the world through that lens. This phenomenon is connected to cognitive bias. The brain becomes better at detecting information that confirms existing beliefs. As a result, someone who believes people are untrustworthy will unconsciously notice examples that reinforce that belief while ignoring contradictory evidence. This mechanism explains why changing mental habits can transform life experiences. When someone deliberately trains their attention toward constructive possibilities, the brain gradually forms new cognitive patterns. This is not about unrealistic positivity, but about balanced awareness. The brain becomes capable of recognizing opportunities that were previously invisible. Emotional regulation is another key element of psychological development. People often believe emotions simply happen to them, but emotions are influenced by interpretation, attention, and physiological states. For example, when someone experiences anxiety before speaking in public, the physical sensations might include a faster heartbeat and heightened alertness. If the person interprets these sensations as danger, anxiety intensifies. But if the same sensations are interpreted as excitement or readiness, the emotional experience changes dramatically. The physical signals remain similar, but the psychological meaning transforms the outcome. People who develop strong emotional regulation skills tend to respond rather than react. Reaction is automatic and impulsive. Response involves a brief pause in which the mind evaluates the situation before acting. That pause may last only a few seconds, but it represents a crucial psychological skill. Individuals who frequently react impulsively often struggle with emotional self-control or unresolved internal stress. In contrast, those who respond thoughtfully typically possess greater emotional awareness and cognitive flexibility. Relationships provide some of the clearest windows into human psychology. When people form close connections, they unconsciously reveal their deepest emotional patterns. Some individuals become highly attentive and supportive, constantly trying to maintain harmony. Others may become distant, or controlling. These patterns often originate from early life experiences. The brain learns relationship strategies during childhood and then applies them automatically in adult interactions. For example, someone who grew up in an environment where approval was conditional may develop a strong desire to please others. Their behavior might include over-apologizing, avoiding conflict, and prioritizing other people's needs above their own. Psychologically, this reflects a fear of rejection combined with a belief that love must be earned through compliance. On the other hand, someone who experienced emotional inconsistency might develop a pattern of emotional distance. They may struggle to express vulnerability because the brain associates openness with potential disappointment. When a person displays consistent reliability, honesty, and emotional stability in relationships, psychologists often interpret this as a sign of secure attachment. Their internal model of relationships assumes that people can be trusted and that emotional closeness is safe. But when someone frequently withdraws, tests loyalty, or creates unnecessary conflict, it may indicate unresolved emotional wounds. These behaviors are rarely intentional attempts to cause harm. They are usually subconscious strategies designed to protect the individual from perceived emotional threats. Another psychological trick that can dramatically change life involves understanding the power of expectations. The brain tends to act in ways that confirm its expectations. If someone believes they will fail, they may unconsciously reduce effort, avoid preparation, or interpret neutral feedback as criticism. These behaviors increase the likelihood of failure, reinforcing the original belief. Conversely, when someone genuinely expects improvement or success, they often invest more effort and persistence. This effect is not magical thinking. It is behavioral reinforcement. Expectations influence motivation, attention, and emotional resilience. When people believe improvement is possible, they continue trying even after setbacks. When they believe outcomes are predetermined, they may give up prematurely. The psychological consequences of negative thinking patterns can be profound. Chronic self-doubt gradually erodes self-esteem. Over time, individuals may begin to avoid opportunities, social interactions, or challenges because they anticipate rejection or failure. This avoidance creates a cycle. The more someone withdraws from experiences, the fewer opportunities they have to build confidence or develop skills. Long-term psychological stress can also affect mental health. Persistent rumination, which involves repeatedly thinking about negative experiences, increases the risk of anxiety and depression. The brain becomes trapped in a loop of self-criticism and worry. People experiencing this pattern often believe they are analyzing problems productively, but in reality, they are reinforcing emotional distress without generating solutions. Relationships also suffer when negative psychological patterns dominate behavior. Constant suspicion, emotional withdrawal, or excessive criticism can gradually weaken trust between individuals. Even when both people care deeply about each other, unresolved psychological triggers can create cycles of misunderstanding. One person may interpret silence as rejection, while the other simply needs time to process emotions. Without awareness of these patterns, both individuals may feel hurt despite having positive intentions. Psychologists analyze these behaviors through careful observation of patterns rather than isolated events. A single action rarely reveals a person's psychological structure. Instead, professionals examine consistent reactions across different situations. They pay attention to emotional triggers, recurring conflicts, communication styles, and coping strategies. For instance, if someone repeatedly interprets neutral comments as criticism, this may indicate a cognitive bias related to self-esteem. Another method involves examining emotional responses to stress. Stress often reveals the brain's default coping strategies. Some individuals become highly organized and proactive when faced with pressure. Others become overwhelmed and withdraw from responsibilities. These reactions provide insight into underlying belief systems and emotional resilience. Subconscious signals also play an important role in psychological analysis. Micro-expressions. brief facial expressions that appear for fractions of a second can reveal emotions that people attempt to hide. Changes in voice tone, breathing patterns, and physical posture can also indicate shifts in emotional state. Skilled observers combine these signals with contextual information to understand what a person may be experiencing internally. Ultimately, the goal of understanding psychological tricks is not to control others, but to understand ourselves more deeply. When we recognize how the brain interprets experiences, we gain the ability to reshape our responses. Instead of reacting automatically, we begin to choose behaviors that align with our long-term well-being. Life rarely changes through dramatic transformations. Instead, it changes through small psychological adjustments repeated consistently over time. A slight shift in interpretation can reduce unnecessary stress. A moment of patience can prevent a damaging argument. A habit of curiosity can replace judgment and open the door to meaningful conversations. Human psychology is both complex and remarkably predictable. The same patterns that create misunderstanding and conflict can also create empathy and connection when understood correctly. When people learn to recognize emotional triggers, cognitive biases, and subconscious habits, they begin to experience life with greater clarity. In the end, the most powerful psychological trick is awareness. Awareness transforms unconscious patterns into conscious choices. It allows individuals to step outside automatic reactions and examine the deeper motivations behind their behavior. When people develop this level of insight, they begin to navigate relationships, challenges, and personal goals with greater wisdom. The human mind is not a fixed structure. It is a dynamic system capable of learning, adapting, and evolving. Every conversation, every challenge, and every moment of reflection reshapes neural pathways. By understanding the psychological mechanisms that guide behavior, individuals gain the ability to influence their own mental landscape. And when that happens, life does not necessarily become easier, but it becomes clearer. Decisions carry greater intention. Relationships become more authentic. Emotional reactions become more manageable. Invisible patterns of the mind gradually reveal themselves. And with that awareness comes a profound sense of personal freedom.